Our guest speaker today is Dr. Susan Kolb. She's going to be giving us a talk on spiritual protection through intuitive guidance. She says we are facing so many dangers in our everyday lives currently. Susan will tell us how Noetic Science can enable us to protect ourselves through the use of our intuitive powers. The word noetic comes from the ancient Greek nous, for which there is no exact equivalent in English. It refers to inner knowing, a kind of intuitive consciousness, direct and immediate access to knowledge beyond what is available to our normal senses and the power of reason. Noetic Sciences are explorations into the nature and potentials of consciousness, using multiple ways of knowing, including intuition, feeling, reason, and the senses. Noetic Sciences explore the inner cosmos of the mind, and that's consciousness, soul, spirit, and how it relates to the outer cosmos of the physical world. Please welcome Dr. Susan Kolb.
Well, thank you. I became fascinated with the idea of Noetic Science after meeting Edgar Mitchell. My video production company actually did video work with him, and his explanation of his experiences when he was going to the moon really led me to understand that it is experiential. Many religions have dogma, they have ideas, they have philosophies, but I think what sets apart theosophy and the teachings of Master DK as through the Alice Bailey materials and the people at Noetic Science is experiential. It is very important not to believe something because I say so. It's important for you to experience what it is that your higher self, your monad, as high up as you want to go in the hierarchy, wants you to experience. So my path is not your path. Each individual has a very, very unique path. And today I'd like to speak a little bit about some of the guideposts and some of the little fun things you can do to stay on the path so that you can avoid the very epidemic problems we have with depression, anxiety, panic attacks. We're in the midst of a crisis involving spirituality. People don't know it as such because they don't understand what spirituality is. But if you look around and see the turmoil that people have with their health, their finances, and their relationships, things are coming to a head, and things will actually, probably in the next 3 or 4 years, get a little more intense before they improve. So I wanted to speak today of some of the things that you can actually do, exercises and information that hopefully will allow you to be more confident that you're on the path that you need to be on. How do we receive information from the God or the Godhead or the universe or the cosmos, whatever you want to call it? How do you receive information, Wes? What's interesting too, Wes, is that when you change direction, say you were you had one job for a while, but now you're going to start on something new. Like something I'm going to be doing is called etheric surgery. So I have new guides coming in to help me with that. So your guides do not stay with you your whole lifetime, except probably those who are assigned. But if I run a business. I have Millennium Healthcare, Plasticos, and Avatar, and about 40 employees. And so when I need advice about business, I ask for business guidance. And I think that that's a good thing to do. If you develop, say your child or significant other develops a disease, you may want to have some medical guidance. you know, which doctor to go to, whether or not to have a procedure, whether or not to take chemotherapy. That would be a good guidance. Huh? Oh, I'm a plastic.
It's not really on here, though.
No, it isn't. It's on some of the other things back there. I am a plastic surgeon. A plastic surgeon, yes. I've been a plastic surgeon 26 years. And I developed a pretty severe illness from leaking breast implants. I was actually spiritually guided to get breast implants. I didn't. Silicone. The chemicals in the silicone were leaking out after about 8 years.
That happens.
I got deathly ill, and because I'm a medical intuitive, I came up with what was going on. Just one side was leaking, so everything was on one side, so it was easy to know what was going on. So I came up with a number of protocols. I studied holistic medicine, functional medicine, detoxification, and came up with a series of protocols to help women. I have treated over 2,000 women from all over the world. And I recently released a book on the problem. And it's not just about breast implants. It's about all the problems we have.
The Naked Truth book?
The Naked Truth about breast implants. It's about the problem we have, which involves GMO foods, cellular telephones, you know.
An artificial world.
Exactly. All the chemicals. The fact that our media doesn't disclose the truth, the fact that our government organizations go with politics rather than science. 8 FDA scientists blew the whistle on the FDA. You might have read that. It was in the New York Times, I think. And the fact that the corporations really don't do due diligence in testing. And then by the time the problems start to occur, especially if the problems don't occur for 5 to 15 years, they're in a position where they have to defend everything, so they hire PR companies like Dow Corning did to convince everybody that there's no problem, when in fact there's a big problem. Well, in the clinic, out of the plastic surgery section, the patients wanted a clinic to help to deal with all the other problems, you know, blood pressure, diabetes, internal medicine problems, cancer. So I started the Plastic Surgery Center in '95, and then in '98 I added the integrative medical component of Millennium Healthcare. And so we have family practice, GYN, chiropractic, traditional Chinese medicine, you know, all the different things that are in there. Then in '99 we added the cancer clinic, and that really took me into spiritual medicine, which is what my next book, which I'm starting now, is going to be on spiritual medicine, because there's so much fourth dimensional influences. Wes and I were talking about this a few minutes ago. Especially now, so much fourth dimensional influences on third dimensional disease, that if you fail to understand that you're not going to get good success. So, and then this book was released yesterday. It's called Goddess Shift, Women Leading for a Change, and I'm one author out of 42. They're leaders from all aspects of human endeavor. We have Jane Fonda, Madonna, Shirley MacLaine, Whoopi Goldberg, Angelina Jolie, Barbara Walters, Oprah, J.K. Rowling, Olympia Dukakis, you know, on and on. So now the breast implant problem is going to be known by all these women. And you know, before now it wasn't safe to do so.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't safe to do so. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. Safety. I mean, yes, I knew I needed to write this book, but I knew I couldn't write the book for a long time. Why not? Silicone implants were still off the market. The lawsuits were still going on. You know, if Dow Chemical, if they could prove that breast implants cause systemic disease rather than local disease, Dow Chemical would have had to pay $1 billion more out to the women. Do you think it would be safe for me to write that book proving the systemic effects?
It's all about the lawyers.
Well, it's about following your guidance. So in the beginning of the book I say, you know, basically I say it's about guidance. It's now safe for me to write the book. And women who become sick from their implants don't always have local chest wall problems, so they don't know that their implants are leaking. Eventually they know, because it starts burning and getting problematic for them, But in the beginning, they don't know. And some women who are very intuitive know it's their implants, even though all of their doctors say it isn't. And some of my younger women, their mothers know it's their implants, which is really interesting. So we have around us a safety mechanism, a safety center for us to take advantage of. And one thing I like to tell people, and play with this is a lot of fun. If you're not sure about a decision, if you're just not sure, don't act. Ask the universe for a sign. And I give an example. A friend of mine asked me to borrow some money, but my friend, she was a doctor, but she was kind of irresponsible. So I didn't know whether I should lend it to her or not lend it to her because, you know, she was kind of in a bind, and I thought maybe I should help her, but again, I didn't know. So I asked for a sign. And that was in the days when Saturday Night Live was on. And Saturday Night Live came on, and this guy held up one of these cardboard signs, and it says, "I have spent all of my money, give me some of yours." So I called her up and I said, no, I wasn't going to give her a loan. So, right. So you can ask in general for a sign, and I think that's smart. And I think it's also smart not to proceed if you're not sure of your path. I tell people all the time with surgery, unless it's an emergency, don't have surgery unless you know it's the right thing to do. Because that fear, those thoughts of fear and anxiety create physical things that interfere with healing. And that's been shown through psychoneuroimmunology. So what are some of the ways the average person who's not yet conscious of, like the group here is, will say they have feelings, gut feelings. Well, those gut feelings can actually be very accurate. They are at the level of survival. Somebody, I'll give you an example. I had a patient who I was called to DeKalb ER to see. She had gone to the Waffle House at 3 in the morning and somehow the whole table had kind of gotten into a fight with the cook. I don't know over what, but anyway. And so the cook took the condiment tray and crashed it over her head. And of course it's glass, and it was horrible. She had cuts everywhere in her face. So I walk in, and the first thing I say, it's like 5 in the morning, the first thing I say is, "Did something tell you not to go to the Waffle House?" And she goes, "Yeah.
Not the local bar that serves food.
No, it's the Waffle House. Yeah, something told me not to go to the Waffle House." That small, still voice. I said, well, why did you go? She says, "My friends talked me into it." Some friends, huh? So anyway, I maintain, and I did this for many years. I covered 6 ERs in town for many, many years. So I'd always ask people, and there's 2 categories. One is, yeah, they were warned, but they didn't listen. And the other category is no warning whatsoever. And guess what that is for? Karma. You don't get any warning if it's supposed to happen. And I don't know if anybody here has had a car wreck, but you may have had no warning whatsoever. Now, I had an interesting experience. I had a roommate, and I didn't realize it was connected to him, but I suddenly was worried that someone was going to run into the back of me. And I never had that thought before. And then he called me up. Someone had hit him from behind. So sometimes you can't tell if it's for you or for someone around you. But it is a weird system of information coming in. Now, I came in a little early, and we were reading out of the Key to Theosophy. And actually, the answer's in there. We're connected to all that is. The more clear your consciousness, and I take every opportunity I can to just blank my mind to see what's going to come in or whatever. Because that is really the key to having the information to maneuver in this dimension. Now, what's exciting is we're coming up on maneuvering in a whole bunch of different dimensions. And lately, the group that I work with has had some very interesting things that have occurred simultaneously in the 4th and the 3rd dimension. I'll give you an example. Right after the flood occurred, my crawl space flooded, and I went down there to pull out some rugs that hadn't been wrapped in plastic because they'd gotten wet. So on my way to the crawl space, I heard very clearly, get your cell phone. So I went back and got my cell phone. Didn't tell me why, just get your cell phone. So I went in, pulled the rugs out, and put them up on the deck. And then the next day, my maintenance guy was going to come over, and he had the thought, well, what if I get bit by a snake under Dr. Kolb's house? Well, he goes there, and sure enough, there's a rattler about ready to strike, so he kills it. Now, one of my patients goes out, because she knows some people at the wildlife, whoever is expert in the wildlife, and they say they've never seen rattlesnakes anywhere near my house, ever, reported, which is very interesting. And I do some more exploration with some of the shamans that I work with, and the fourth dimensional aspects, I'm being attacked on the fourth dimension with snakes at the same time. There's a rattlesnake in my crawl space. And then it happened again. I started seeing spiders everywhere. I was seeing like 50 spiders a day, which is really strange because, you know, I've got, you know, pest control things in place. And so I talked to my shaman about that, and he said, he took a look at me in the fourth dimension. I was being wrapped up in spider webs. And I didn't tell him about the spiders, so I didn't say anything. I said, just take a look. And he said, you're being wrapped up. Now, he unwrapped me, and guess what? All the spiders disappeared. So what is the connection between the fourth and the third dimensions? I mean, it was just really fascinating to me. And
what are the third and fourth dimensions that you're talking about?
well, there's a website that I'd refer you to by John Horniker, which I think is, I don't know, it's the Cosmic something, but anyway, John Horniker. He was going to write a book, but he said he never published it. I got a pre-copy of it a long time ago. It's got the best description of what the dimensions are that I've ever read. But it's up on his website because he just put it all up there instead of putting it in a book. That way he can change it. He was a businessman that was channeling some very, very high information about physics and metaphysics. Essentially, John says that the dimensions are related to the precessional rate of the atom. That's the means by which the atom tilts. When the atoms are close by each other, the precessional rate being low, then we have the lower dimensions. And then when it's higher, the atoms separate and go out, and then we have the higher dimensions. So the masters would say all the dimensions are right here, which is true. I mean, heaven's not up there, or, you know, everything coexists at the same time. So the third, fifth, seventh, and ninth dimensions are more stable than the sixth, you know, the even dimensions. There are second dimensional aspects to disease, and there sure is fourth dimensional aspects to disease. That's what I'm exploring now for the new book. I think that in the next few years, many of us are going to start actively going between dimensions and doing a lot more exploration and bringing a lot more information into this dimension from the higher dimensions. I think that we will realize that we truly are multidimensional beings. When you go to sleep at night, you do go out of body. I know that I was exhausted during Haiti, the first 2 weeks of Haiti. Did you all feel the same emotional exhaustion? Well, I was watching CNN, and they were interviewing this woman who was stuck for 5 days without food and water and a pretty severe leg injury. And yet, when they got her out, she was doing pretty good. Made no sense. I mean, any doctor, and the CNN doctor said, this can't happen. Well, why do you think she was doing so good? Because we, meaning all of us, that were able to, were down there giving her light. Okay? That's what we were doing. And so I actually had to ask one night to please let me sleep, because I had, like, you know, a 10-hour surgery to do the next day, and I just was being stretched too thin. I had an interesting thing happen during the Gulf War. I was in the military at the time. I'd just gotten out. I had 13 years as a military officer. And I was on vacation with my family, and I got really tired and went to bed at 8 o'clock, and that's just unheard of. And I had this very lucid dream of being on the front of a tank that was going through this terrain of a desert with very weird trenches in it. And then when I woke up the next morning, that was the night we invaded Kuwait, and then what I saw on CNN was what I saw in my dreams. Now, there's no way I could have even known we were going to invade Kuwait, much less known the details of it. So I believe that we go in the fourth dimension in our light bodies, if you want to call them, or etheric bodies, and we help, and we guide, and we do what we can, especially if we're associated. Now, you know, I'm medical, so, you know, I would be wanting to help with the disasters. I'm military, so I'd be interested in the war. And I think that when people go into battle or when people are trapped under buildings, a large amount of help is available. Now, this woman on CNN, they asked her why she thought she lived, and she said, I prayed. That's all she said. I just prayed the whole time. So I think she just went out and then drew all of us in to give her energy. And as you know, there are a group of people called breatharians that don't eat or drink and live on light, so why not a woman who's trapped? I mean, there should be no difference. She was open to it. And she wasn't that, I mean, they gave her some IVs, but the doctor said she wasn't that dehydrated. You try going, yeah, it was 90 degrees there. Yeah, this is just remarkable to me. So, if we truly are one, that opens things up quite a bit. So how do you get the information from the oneness about what you should be doing? What occupation, what relationship, you know, if you should lend somebody money, if you should, you know, just the small things in life too. If you should buy something or wait. I think you do it by feeling nature. And what I tell people to do is feel. If you have a major decision to make, blank your mind and then feel into both outcomes. And oftentimes you can feel which one feels clearer and smoother. Some of my patients even came up with a stop sign that comes up in their consciousness, you know, like stop, or a green light and a red light. It does work pretty well. Then eventually, many of us have started with dowsing and using the pendulum to get yes and no answers. You probably have experienced that. But then eventually, in fact, I taught the medical students at Emory dowsing and pendulum techniques to help them develop their intuition. But eventually, you get to the point where you don't need a device, because you're asking the question, all of a sudden you hear yes or no, and then a bunch more detail. So that is spiritual hearing. And with spiritual hearing, especially when you're asking about your own stuff, you better get some other people, like I have, a group, so you can compare notes. Because hearing can be from two sides of things. You know, you can have your hearing from your personality or self, and you can have your hearing from your higher self, and sometimes they're hard to tell the difference between. I was actually up in the Blue Ridge Mountains studying with a group of clairvoyants when I was laying in bed at night, and I had a screw turn inside my ear, and then my spiritual hearing came on. It was weird, very strange. Then the next thing is spiritual sight. I relate these to the chakras. Actually, I relate them in the Goddess book. The gut feeling, you know, the survival stuff, the stuff the Navy SEALs are really good at, is at the solar plexus level. The heart is that feeling, that going out, taking your feeling nature out into things and seeing how you feel about it. More detail, not just, you know, it coming in and hitting you and go, ooh, I better not go down that alley, or I better not drive down that road. This is hearing. This is the, and I think that opening this chakra has a lot to do with not my will, but thy will be done. If you are willful, if you are, have a sense of separation, this will not open. You have to kind of surrender that will There's books on that. There's a book that I read called The Right Use of Will. I'm not sure who read it, but it was a very good book. The will aspect has to come under control so that the soul or the higher self can guide you. So you can't be in the dogma of religion. It just doesn't work, because that's a whole nother chakra you're dealing at. So in spiritual hearing, when I started having that, I would hear things like, I was on the way down to work one day, and I heard that someone was going to steal the picture out of the patient bathroom, and of course I said, no, they wouldn't do that, and then they did. So anyway, it brings up all sorts of interesting questions about past, present, and future, because you hear stuff, and there's just no way that time is linear. This information has to be coming from a higher level where everything's seen at once. I mean, it has to be. So therefore, you have your clairvoyance, your prophecies, all of that come from that level. Now, sight is interesting. Sight, I've had visions all my life, and I tell people they're protective. I was driving to work one day. I was going to go do an abdominoplasty or a tummy tuck, and I had a vision. Visions are very quick. Visions like take everything. They don't last long, which is good when you're driving a car. But I had a vision of the operative site of the case I was going to do that day. And there was a hernia. There shouldn't have been a hernia there. She had no previous surgery. She had no symptoms. She had nothing to indicate there would be. And yet she did. When I opened her up, she had a hernia there. And if you go too quickly with the bovie or the knife, you can go right into that and injure the bowel. So I use spiritual sight a lot in surgery, obviously, to find out where things are. And then I hear, slow down. I hear the nerve is wrapped around the lymph node. And sure enough, it is. Every time I hear that. Because I do a lot of dissection of sick nodes and taking them out. They have silicone in them. And there's a lot of blood vessels and nerves in that axilla. So when I was interviewing my surgeons to help me, I said I would interview them on how intuitive they were, because that's very, very important when you're in the armpit. So sight is something that has to do with this chakra, or the brow chakra, and it is, sometimes people have visions and they don't know what they are, and later on they'll find out. Sometimes the visions actually are of the masters and of the guides that are helping you. I mean, I've seen faces that I didn't know who they were, but then later on I found that they were one of my guides. I have a Tibetan guide, for example, and I didn't realize who it was until I saw his face like that. So sight is something that you can develop, through spiritual practices that clear chakras. And I think sight is really clear seeing and not judgment. People who are judgmental don't have spiritual sight. They just don't, because they're always judging. They've always decided beforehand, and that shuts down the energy centers where the information has to come in. So we have a complex energy body, and once you get to mastership, you have the last one, which is the crown. Anybody know what that is? What's that? It's not sight, it's not hearing, it's not feeling. What is it? Knowing. Right. Have you ever known something? Like, absolutely, you bet $1 million on it? Yeah. That's the way the masters go around all the time. It's pretty neat. So.
What is it called?
Huh?
What is it called?
Knowing. Knowing, right. Knowing. So we are basically a biophysical computer before we're a biochemical computer. Physics is always before chemistry. And you have to clear the filters that you have developed over many lifetimes, not just this lifetime. So you have to clear the filters and remove the obstructions. And I think that spiritual growth is more about dropping belief systems and taking belief systems on. The more beliefs you drop, the more clear you are. It's like if you really want to see the reflection of God in a pond, that pond has to be perfectly still. If it's all like this with your thoughts, it's chaotic, fear-based, lower vibration. The world's a very scary place. Which brings me to the point of the lecture. should you get the flu shot? Should you eat the things, you know, with corn in it in Kroger versus Whole Foods? Okay. Is there any corn out there that isn't GMO? And what does it do? What does GMO corn do to the vast majority of people? The answer is it causes food allergies. What about soy? I found out soy the hard way. I decided to become vegetarian for a while. I'd been vegetarian for about 20 years, but then I started eating some chicken and fish, and then I decided to go back. And so my patients were bringing me soy from the restaurants, you know, the Thai and Chinese. I got deathly ill. Then I found out, because I've interviewed the authors on the books, Jeffrey Smith, who wrote Genetic Roulette and Seeds of Deception, and an environmental attorney who wrote Uncertain Peril, that soy depresses the immune system. Right. So you need to know, you need to educate yourself, and there's a really good website for GMO called responsibletechnology.org, how to avoid the dangers. And if you get something like the allergy to corn, what can fix it, which is NATE. Dr. Mike Greenberg in my office does that, because I got that, and then he fixed it. And many of my patients who have food allergies have skyrocketed since GMO foods. They really have. And food allergies aren't just GI things. They cause fatigue, headaches, muscle aches, and a lot of it is because of GMO. Cellular telephones. There's one.
What was the website you mentioned just a moment ago?
responsibletechnology.org. I interviewed Dr. Carlo. I've done this radio show every week for over 16 years, and I did a TV show every week for 6 years. So I read a few books. Dr. Carlo was hired by the cell phone companies to do $20 million worth of research to show that they were safe, when he actually showed that they do cause both acoustic neuromas and malignant neuroepithelial tumors or brain cancer. They tried to flip him. When he wouldn't flip, they burned his house down. He fled and wrote the book. Well, most of the people I interview on my radio show have had an assassination attempt, and I can tell you all the ins and outs of all of them because they've told me themselves. And most of them, oddly enough, are initiates with full spiritual sight and hearing. How interesting. So you come to the idea that when a problem is going to arise in consciousness, the solution rises at the same time. So Dr. Garth Nicholson, who discovered the weaponized mycoplasma behind Gulf War syndrome, he discovered it because they tried to kill him and his wife. And then he got the treatment. He helped, I don't know how many people with Gulf War syndrome all over the world. They made him an honorary Navy SEAL, and he told me the people on the inside would tell him when the next assassination attempt was coming. He had 4. Okay. Dr. Hildegard Staninger, who is an environmental toxicologist, discovered that in the chemtrails, there's the same fibers that are in the Morgellons patients. And if you don't know what Morgellons is, look it up. Look on YouTube. And she told me that she had, her luggage got delayed between Florida and California. And she has spiritual hearing. She didn't open it. She had somebody open it with a hazmat suit. It was anthrax. Yeah. She goes, Susan, the only people that have anthrax is the government. Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Dr. Horowitz. You all know Dr. Horowitz, don't you? Dr. Horowitz wrote Emerging Viruses. Last time he was in town, he had a flak jacket on. He'd been shot at. Okay. So anyway, I believe that when a problem arises in consciousness, the solution rises at the same time. When I was guided to get breast implants, I had no clue I was going to get sick from them. You know, spirits run on a need-to-know basis, just like the military. And I think you just have to follow guidance one point at a time, not really looking too far out sometimes, because, you know, had I known how sick I was going to become, I might have chosen not to get them. Do you see now why we can't know everything along the path we're on? We just can't. It's not good for us to know everything. So I don't go too far out asking questions. I'm more like, what should I do today? I got up one morning and I heard, nothing you thought you were going to do today are you going to do. You're going to do something completely different. And then that's what happened. Isn't that neat? Aren't those surprises nice? You know, makes it a little more fun, the surprise factor. So I would say that each of you has a guiding principle within you. It's a connection to all that is, or the great void, all that will be. And there's some very interesting explanations of that in the Key to Theosophy, if you want to explore that further. Because we are connected to all that is, based on how well we can clear our filters and how well we can drop belief systems that are limiting, you will be guided and protected. I had a friend email me. He said, I've got some amazing news. I want to meet with you on Sunday. So I said, okay, what time? I didn't hear from him. And then Sunday passed, and on Tuesday, his significant other called me, and she called the front desk, and I was in with my manager, and they said, Belinda is calling, and I looked at my manager, and I said, Linford's dead. And he was. His amazing news was on Monday he was told he was going to die. He wanted to share that with me. He thought he had a lot more time now. He died on Tuesday. He was happy. He was joyful. He was going home. Isn't that great? Great story, huh? Yeah. So the point is, he wasn't told when he was 18 when he was going to die. He was 62. He was told the day before. So, Deepak Chopra wrote a great book called The Book of Secrets. And in the book, he talks about going to the Rishi masters in India. And the Rishi masters, 5,000 years ago, sat in meditation and wrote on scrolls, starting with the person's name, their parents, their sibs, their life path, who they married, who their children are, and then finally at the bottom of the date of their death. They didn't write it for everybody who was going to come into incarnation, just the people that were going to go later and look up their scrolls. So, sure enough, Deepak's was there, and he makes an accounting, and then they ask, well, his mother's name was different than what he knew. So he calls her and says, I've got, this is your name. And then she admitted that even though she'd told nobody, that was her given name, but she didn't like it, so she didn't tell anybody. And then they asked him if he wanted to know the date of his death, and he said, yeah. And that's in the Book of Secrets, which I highly recommend. And I was interviewing Ervin Laszlo, who wrote one of the best books I've read called The Science in the Akashic Field. And I say, Ervin, you know, because Deepak was on the front of his book. I said, you know Deepak's Book of Secrets? He says, yeah. I said, well, I want you to explain the science in the Akashic Field, the integral theory of everything, which is what the title of the book is, how that can be. How can a Rishi master 5,000 years ago write this scroll out that is so accurate? Well, then you begin to realize that time is illusionary. It doesn't exist. Eternity exists all at once, because otherwise you couldn't do that. It's hard to wrap your mind around that. But the real truth is this dimension is an illusion. This is a very convincing illusion, as Einstein would say, very convincing. But there is now ample scientific evidence coming out of superstring theory and quantum physics. And if you haven't read Dr. Amit Goswami's books, I highly recommend it. I've interviewed him about 6 times. There is ample evidence that none of this is real, that it is all a projection of consciousness from a higher level. So why wouldn't you be able to get spiritual protection? The voice of your conscience or your higher self is a still soft voice, but it's persistent. Okay? It says the same thing softly. The other voice tends to be more critical, more sharp, more, I don't know, just, it's a different quality. Yeah, it's a different quality. And some of those voices actually are more negative energies trying to influence you. I mean, there's just not two. There's a lot. I mean, I do healings on some of my patients, and if they've got some spirits on them that don't want me around, I get threatened, They're going to make me have a car wreck. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And I go, no, you're not. It's just not going to happen. I'm not open to that. So.
You seem to speak more from experience than from book learning. Would you consider yourself as an initiate, or am I asking too personal a question?
No, I think I am.
That's what I thought.
Initiate. There's four, according to Alice Bailey.
Okay.
Yeah, according to Alice Bailey, there's 4 classes of people within the spiritual hierarchy in the human realm. One are ordinary people, and I guess the vibratory rate, according to David Hawkins, power versus force, would be below 200. And these people are just survival. You know, they're third world countries, just survival, no interest in anything religious or spiritual. Then you have your disciples, and those are most of your major religions. People are trying to do the right thing in whatever religion they choose, or sometimes they have no religion, but they're just trying to do the right thing, live by the golden rule, so to speak. When you're an initiate, you start to use energy consciously, and you know you're using energy consciously. I've lost something in a restaurant, really wanted it back, and then my tech found it in a drawer in the operating room. You know you're using energy consciously because that's impossible. Yeah. So, and you have to be harmless in thought, word, and deed. You literally cannot be, you can have nothing in your field that would harm another, because the energy comes through and it can literally harm other people if you do not if you're not harmless. And then when you master everything, of course, you're called a master. And I think when all of us are on our way to becoming masters, I think that we will be Christed in the next, I don't know, 100 years, whatever time period that there is. We don't know for sure. I mean, but I think we will all be Christed, and we will all then have the opportunity to, like the other masters do, to be in constant communication with this consciousness.
Have you ever had a situation of where someone thought that they saw you somewhere or even spoke to you, and you know you weren't there, you may have been asleep or something, but someone is very adamant that you were there?
It's called bilocation, and yes, at least 10 times. And usually it's a spiritual emergency. I'm not always aware of it consciously, but I get some thoughts of that person, and some of them don't even know me, but they'll call me up and say that, thank you very much, I was sure I was dying, I was in a spiritual emergency, I was, you know, whatever, and you appeared by my bedside and did a healing on me or something like that. And yeah, that's bilocation. And most initiates are aware of that, mainly because the people come and tell them that they saw them. And so, I mean, these people, some of them are my patients, but some of them I never met before, which is strange. And that's why I think Haiti, I think we were there. I think that when you hear these miracles, they aren't so much miracles as they're just light. We're just giving light. And Jesus gave light to Lazarus, and look what happened there. I mean, you know, it's pretty good. Well, I can leave my body without being asleep, so that's, you know, I mean, you also leave your body when you're under anesthesia. And there's some interesting initiate anesthesiologists that are looking at that. You know, I don't know for sure. I think I would have to ask my friend who's an anesthesiologist studying that section. He may know, because he's done extensive research about what happens when you're under anesthesia in the sleep state.
You spoke about a strong foundation in ethics before you get onto this path of initiation, doing good to other people and so on. Why is that so important?
I think thoughts, actions, and belief systems that are not ethical block you. They're lower vibration. Everything can be kind of understood by vibratory level. David Hawkins says the masters vibrate at 1,000. The regular folks who aren't even disciples yet, below 200, and then you have your range from there. And if the planet is to undergo an ascension, it makes sense that the higher energy people will be ascending with the planet, whereas the lower energies will fall dead. And even in Revelations it says that. Two people are standing in the field, one falls over and the other's fine. So I don't know if, did any of you watch Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory? Well, the last one was interesting. It was about billions and billions of dollars being spent on these underground cities for when whatever happens in 2012 is going to happen. Well, what I think these people are preparing for is I think they're preparing for staying in the third dimension, because it's not going to be very nice in the third dimension. If you don't know what I mean, look at Mars, Venus. I mean, it's pretty hard to inhabit. Everybody with a vibrational level above a certain rate, and I don't know what it is, but will ascend because it's going to be vibrational. So this is not the year to have negative thinking. This is not the year to, cheat on your income tax. This is not the year to, you see what I mean? Go out ethics with your relationships or your finances or anything else. It's just not worth it. It's December 21st, 2012. It's the end of the Mayan calendar. And I interviewed about 6 authors on 2012, and the one I like the best is a book called 2012, Catastrophe or Awakening. Because he's a scientist, and he's also a spiritual scientist, but he has everything laid out that I think is important to know with scientific evidence. Yeah, I'm not sure I could. But all of these interviews are up on my website. If you go to plasticos.com, look under resources and then under radio, you'll see all of the interviews. We've interviewed so many people. We interviewed 2 weeks ago an astronomer who interviewed, I think, 30 people, the kind of a compilation work like this one, called Cosmic Conversations. 1/4 of them were scientists, 1/4 were spiritual leaders, 1/4 were indigenous spiritual leaders, and 1/4 were social, spiritual people who change, for planetary change. Great book, I'll tell you what, and great interview. He was really good. So I like to explore things. I like to try to figure out how things work. And what I found is you can't figure out if the third dimension is all that is. It doesn't make sense. So exploring these other dimensions, that's just part of why we're here.
Now, I'm used to the fourth dimension being time. Is that what you're calling it?
No, it's actually a place. It's not real friendly right now. It's kind of a dangerous place right now. You've got to be careful when you travel in it.
She said,
time is illusionary, just like space is, but the dimensions are different.
Can you give us an insight into what this fourth dimension looks like?
Well, I'll tell you what I did recently. One of my friends was put in hospice with a big hepatocellular carcinoma. And I was actually his doctor. I ordered the scan, and the radiologist told me he had a huge cancer in the left lobe of his liver, and it was inoperable. And he went to Emory, and the hepatic surgeon said, no way, we know it's cancer, it's inoperable. So he was a good friend of mine who's a really great shaman. So I decided to do what he did, but look at him instead, because he was always looking at me, but I was going to look at him. So together we did some things, and then his mother called me, and she says, he's bleeding. He's blood everywhere. And I said, well, take him to the ER. So they admitted him to Emory, gave him blood transfusions, and he had an ulcer. They fixed that. They decided to do an MRI. MRI showed no evidence of cancer. Don't you love it? It's really great. This is what we're going to be able to do. It's very important to know about the fourth dimension when you're dealing with cancer and Morgellons. Those are the two diseases that you really need to know about the fourth dimension if you're going to treat them. Jesse Ventura did a great thing on HAARP. Are you talking about HAARP?
Yeah.
The
disease is supposedly being caused by it.
Well, I don't think I agree that all disease is being caused by HAARP. I think some of the earthquakes are being caused by HAARP.
what is HAARP?
It's a, well, everybody should go watch Jesse Ventura. His first thing was on harp.
Jesse Ventura?
Jesse Ventura, yeah.
The governor
Fabulous.
of,
Yeah.
Minnesota, was it?
He was a, yeah, he was a,
I know who he was. He was a wrestler.
he was a wrestler, and before that he was a Navy SEAL.
Yeah. He's the guy who could do that.
Yeah. Well, he's got a fabulous series. The first one was on harp, then 9/11, then Big Brother, then global warming, which was really hilarious. That,
And these are what? Presentations on the...
they're hour-long things called conspiracy theory. He exposes the conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And then the last one, then the Manchurian Candidate, with the CIA program where they train assassins to not remember what they
That was a
do.
book quite a while
Well,
back.
actually, go watch Conspiracy Theory. Jesse has a lot of proof.
Without watching that, what is harp?
HARP is a series of antennas that there's some in Alaska, there's some in Colorado, there's some in Russia, there's some in Norway, and there's some in France. And where else? Atlanta. Oh my goodness.
And who sponsors these
Well, they're
visitors?
they're supposedly privately owned, but we know that the government is probably behind it. And they can knock any plane out of the sky. They can create a web so that no plane can come into our airspace. They can do mind control, and Jesse actually had a scientist demonstrate on him. He was like hearing voices in his head from HARP. And then they can cause earthquakes, and they can set the ionosphere on fire, which is what they did in June.
So can't they control like rain?
Yes, weather. Yeah, and Jesse showed that in a cloud chamber. What it is, it's billions of volts or whatever. I'm not sure the scale, but
Well, I think they talked
it's a
about-
lot of energy.
I think they talked about Hurricane Katrina in that.
It would be possible to do that. Now, the proof, Jesse was just showing you that they could do all of these things. He didn't actually say whether they did them, but
Is or is not the government supposed to be involved in this, or
you know, I don't know. I don't know.
it's hard to believe there wouldn't be?
Well, somebody has to fund it, and so somebody has to have pretty deep pockets to fund it because it's expensive. Well, I'm out of time.
Time is an illusion.
Time is an illusion, yeah.
Thank you, Susan.